Thank you, Mr. Sun, for a very informative and interesting presentation. It's very important to understand and to see how China is moving forward after the COVID crisis and how it's making use of opportunities. It was also very interesting when you mentioned that the message to which should go to governments in developing countries, that the textile industry has a promising future in these countries, and the fact that the government should support it. I think this is a very important point. Maybe I can start with the, it was also very interesting to know that, you talked about a suit being turned around in 4 days and then MOQ in a large scale garment factory of 100 units. This is phenomenal. I can start with probably the first question is, with these today, with costs increasing all over the world and in developing countries as well, how does China see it being able to maintain its competitiveness as far as labor costs are concerned? Because just like in any other country, also in China, these are increasing. What do you think China will do for this?
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. This is a very good question. Cost, of course, is a very important factor in the textile manufacturing for the textile industry. I would cut the cost into different sectors. So firstly is the cost for the raw material. And secondly is the cost for logistics. Thirdly is the cost for the electricity, steams, energies. And another cost is the labor cost. If we look at the upstream and the downstream, so we will find if we go to the upstreams, the labor cost is not that important. But if we go to the downstream, for example, the cut and sew sector, so the labor cost becomes very sensitive. And fortunately, in China, we have a very good clusters allocation in China. As I mentioned in my speech, we have more than 200 industrial clusters. And with those industrial clusters, so we are able to gather a lot of factories in vertical industrial chains. That means increase not only the efficiency, but also lower the logistics cost. And so what we are really concerned is the electricity, steam cost, and in addition, the geopolitics will bring the additional cost. For example, the tariff and the customs duties. So this is quite important. And so when you ask me how we deal with the cost issues in China, and therefore I would say we must follow the trend, because in the current world, we must respect people's dream for better life. And therefore we should offer them better salary to give them better opportunities. So we cannot just maintain the labor cost. We have to respect people's dream for the future. And therefore, gradually in China, the people's income is gradually increased. And what we can do is we must think how to make this industry more efficient. And therefore, the information technology, the artificial intelligence becomes more and more important. For example, as I mentioned, even Alibaba, they shift to make the garment factory, the real garment factory. So this is a very important sign. With the new technology, we can transfer the traditional, even labor-intensive factory, a modern one, less labor, use less labor, and the cost can be controlled.
Okay, thank you.
Is that,
Mr. Sun. Yeah. So we have a lot of other questions from the audience. So I will hand it over to Olivia now to proceed with the questions.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. Yeah, indeed, we have selected two questions. I will read them right now for you, Chairman Sun. Then I will hand over to you, Mr. Srinivasan, to continue moderation. And if, just like before, if you need inspiration, you can always come back to me. Chairman Sun, for the moment, the great appreciation of RMB is not conducive to the Chinese textile exports. How can China maintain continuous development and advantages? That will be the first question. And the second question will be the following. We heard about the overcapacity of man-made fibers yesterday. How does China deal with this, and in what order of magnitude is the overcapacity?
So firstly is the RMB issues. The appreciation of RMB, of course, will cause some turbulence for the industry. But I think, as I mentioned, the cost can be affected by many factors. And so currently, I think two important additional costs is the deepest concern from the Chinese industries. One is the tariff and the customer duties, additional tariff customer duties caused by the international policy change, or what we call the geopolitics. And the second one is how we control the electricity energy cost. And with other things, I think it's without big turbulence, it's under control. So this is my answer to the first question. The exchange rate, currently, I think the turbulence is not so high. Yeah, it's quite stable. So it's under control. So what is the second question? It's about
it's about the second question is about overcapacity in man-made fiber.
This is a very interesting question, but I think this is a question also in controversy. Some people might say it's overcapacity, but somebody would say with the social development, there will be a growing demand for the fiber. For instance, during this year's pandemic, the textile find a new usage, the masks, protective clothes, so they find additional demands from the new areas. And in addition, for many other areas, like the geotextiles, like the vehicles, like the airplanes, so they all need technical textiles. And it's the additional demand for the textiles. So I would say it's a paradox to say overcapacity. If we maintain just for people's clothing, yes, the current capacity is enough. But if you look to the future, look to additional usage of the textile fibers, we will say, well, we can even double the capacity. This is what we expect for the future. I think the textile can find many new usage. And I even told the people,
you have to go to Srinivasan.
Yes, everything in the world can be made by the textiles. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sun. Very interesting to hear from you. I think we're running out of time now. Do you have some time for some more questions, Olivier, or shall we?
We can allow ourselves a little bit more.
Sure. Then please go ahead.
Questions.
Yeah, more questions.
Yeah. So the next question, Chairman Sun, is the following. To what extent Chinese textile production will move to Vietnam to benefit from free trade agreements with the EU?
Mm-hmm. That's another good question. So we are watching very closely the free trade agreement between Vietnam and EU. So actually, Vietnam becomes the #1 destination of investment for the Chinese companies. So we have listed some of the important destinations for Chinese investment. Over the past 5 years, Vietnam ranks #1. So already Vietnam becomes the #1 destination for the Chinese textile and apparel companies. And currently our investment in Vietnam is not only limited to the cotton and sew sectors. We also extended to the upstreams like the cotton spinning, like the dyeing and finishing. So we are going to Vietnam in a vertical way. That means we are going to Vietnam through the whole textile chains. And I think in the future, this relationship will be further strengthened because we have to, the Chinese companies have to understand the international politics will make the trade pattern change. We have to adjust our strategy of going abroad. We must go to the regions where they can enjoy the international policy changes. So Vietnam, of course, is somewhere preferred by the Chinese company, and I think this trend will be continued.
Thank you, Mr. Sun. Any more questions, Olivia?
Oh yes, we have here.
We have time.
We only have time for one last question, unfortunately, but I think it's worth asking, and it's a chance to have Mr. Chairman Song with us today. So the last question will extend a little bit on what you just said. Does the current trade context accelerate Chinese investment abroad? Or in other words, are we going to see more Chinese investment in Latin America or Africa to support the local or the regional supply chains? And that for the clothing and textile industry.
Sorry, I'm not quite clear about the question.
If the current, the question is about the current trade context. Yes. With the trade conflicts, does it accelerate the Chinese investments abroad, for example, Latin America?
Well, the trade conflict between the United States and China is a big concern for the Chinese companies. And of course, we are considering how to make the Chinese textile industry sustained. Sustained means, firstly, we are taking care of the environment domestically. We are taking the Chinese employment. And secondly, we are taking care of how the Chinese textiles, Chinese textile and apparel will have the same, maintain their international market shares. And therefore, we have not only have the Chinese textiles exported, we also have some Chinese company move their production capacity in a different place of the world. As I mentioned before, Vietnam is the #1 destination in the past 5 years. #2 is in Africa over the past year, especially for Ethiopia. And with Latin American, so we are looking very much the opportunities to work with the Latin American. I remember 20 years ago, the Latin American is 15 to 30 years ago, Latin American is one of the important destinations for the Chinese company looking for investment. And with NAFTA, I think this process has been suspended for a certain time. But I think now is also the time for Chinese to consider seriously the investment in Latin America. Of course, most of the Chinese companies are private-owned companies. And the decision will be made by the owners. but I think they are ready to look at the whole picture in the world. So Latin America will be one of their consideration. But my suggestion is, we also have a lot of friends from Latin America. I think they also need to show their enthusiasm to welcome the Chinese investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sung. We are done with the questions on our side. I will hand over now to Mr. Srinivasan to wrap up on the session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sun. Very informative and interesting to talk about the future of the textile industry in China. It's always nice to hear what is happening in China and what innovations that are taking place there. I would like to conclude the session by thanking all the participants, Mr. Olivier and yourself for arranging it. It was a very interesting session, and I wish the rest of the conference all success. Thank you very much. We will close the session.
Thank you very much.